So it would appear that we are online. Welcome everyone to today's Titbit session. A special welcome to our two presenters, Agnieszka and Nowinska from Aalborg University Business School and Hans-Joachim Schramm from Vienna University and Copenhagen Business School. My name is Thomas Olesen, and I have the pleasure of being your host in today's session, which Marlock has developed in collaboration with Maritime Research Alliance. Every Wednesday since March, we have had academics from the Danish universities and maritime academies presenting the latest maritime research for you. And today, Agnieszka and Hans-Joachim will present their research on chartering strategies during the financial crisis in liner shipping, a study that was recently published in Journal of Business Research. And we can share a link in the chat if you're interested in reading the entire paper. So the setup for today is that it is short and sweet. The two researchers will spend around 15 to 20 minutes presenting their main findings. During this time, you will have the opportunity to pose questions in the chat. And once the presentation is done, we will have a discussion where I will bring your questions and my own to our speakers. So without further ado, Agnieszka, Hans-Joachim, thank you for joining us, and the scene is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation, Thomas. So I am Aga. I had the pleasure working with Hans-Joachim on this paper, as you introduced. And we're going to share the presentation. So I think without further ado, let me walk you through the paper. So this is the agenda. So we're going to start with a little bit on the industry that we are looking at. And then we're going to share more about what we actually have done with the methods and data and what we find. So we think that the phenomenon we focus on is pretty important. So we all know that the financial crisis hit very severely many different industries. And we also know that shipping is an extremely important industry, including the chartering market that we are going to be focusing right now. So the question we were asking is essentially whether with using this financial crisis as a phenomenon, whether we can see and discover some new and changing strategies of these actors in the market. The idea here being that we can use our findings to inform practitioners in the industry about what is sort of within their reach in terms of changing strategies. So the context is perfect, as I said. First of all, sounds weird, but we had the big hit with the financial crisis that affected the industry severely. We have a multitude of different actors. I'm going to tell you about that in a second, but we have very large and also very small players, which made us think that actually strategies they use might be different. Then we have players with different capacity. They use different ships, and these ships can be or not deployed on different routes or trade lanes because of the different specifications, such as geared or gearless vessels. So we are also exploring this, looking at some kind of strategic versatility or flexibility of players that we think that might matter. And also these people in the chartering market, they close fixtures with each other frequently. That also matters because we will be also looking at whether the fact that we, for example, worked together before will be a mechanism through which people can think of overcoming the crisis. So a little bit more on the chartering market. So let me be clear, we only focus on this chartering market. So essentially people leasing out or chartering their ships. So people like we see here, operators and owners chartering out their ships to either shippers or other operators. And as I mentioned, it's an extremely important industry overall. So it's a cornerstone sort of underlying the international trade and the large industry, having these two types of actors. And that's what we focus on, although, as you can see, we also will link to the sales and purchase markets. We left a little bit the demolishing apart. So again, to sum up, we chose this context to zoom in on the crisis that was very perceptible. As you can see, there is, or at least there should be, a big decrease in the Harpex index and Clarkson container ship earnings due to the crisis. I hope you can see this here, this big bump, sort of towards the right-hand side on the picture. And then we are exploring this to use, we explore this context to essentially look at changing strategies of different types of players who are connected in different ways, so being partners or not. And also we look at the flexibility of the players in terms of their ships deployed, but also even at some country-related aspects. So, Hans-Joachim, this slide is yours.
Yeah, that's my turn. Actually, I'm the data wizard. Yeah. So what we do use is actually hand collected property data on all chartering sales and purchases, on demolition deals. We always looked on the diet to say, okay, there's a vessel chartered from one company to another. And then we actually also distinguish between owners and operators. Yeah. Sources are mainly Clarkson Shipping Intelligence Network. They have a vast listing of these, I must also say, time fixtures or time charter fixtures. And these notices about the charters, but also sales, demolitions, and so on. In addition to this, we took also Edgar Forrester, CW Kellogg Co. This is, I would say, maybe the more or less the gold standard when it comes on sales and purchases in the shipping industry as a whole. And as we had a lot of data, historic data, we had to dig deeply into other databases, like, for example, Aquasis, or the Electronic Quality Shipping Database, and other ship registers and ship spotting websites, because actually when it comes on the smaller vessels, so 1,000 TEU around capacity, then it's very opaque market. Yeah, so there are lots of changes, and that sometimes it's really not really known who is actually the owner, who is actually the operator. Wait a moment. So what we collected then is actually having this, we had to identify the vessels. And we have identified the vessels actually by the IMO number as a unique identifier. So name changes, for example, it's not a problem. What we also did when it comes on the owners and operators, we also identified it by the IMO number, so that, for example, name changes and such alike also didn't matter too much. And we collected abundance of ship characteristics, of course, and had always to cross-check a lot, because when it comes, for example, on the TEU capacity of a vessel, you just look at the one source, you see 1,000, then the other one 1,500. Then you can question whether this is the real capacity or homogeneous capacity, or after some refurbished redo of it. Yeah. But we did actually our best to make it as precise as possible. Now, next slide.
Yes. So as Hans-Joachim said, we are looking at the fixture, so the actual contract between these two actors on supply and demand side, but we also have a very good understanding of the sort of, object of the contract. So what we've done precisely, we have a larger data set, but here we use mostly data from 1999 up to 2011. And we had over 7,000 different fixtures. So based on the fixtures that really happened in the data set, we constructed some kind of, counterfactual fixtures that have not been realized. So actually we filled in our longitudinal panel data with some zeros. And also it's a tricky thing to model such data, so we had to drop some observations to alleviate some modeling troubles, issues, and we control for many alternative explanations that I know probably you would like to ask. So for example, we only focus on companies that survive through the period of time, and we know there have been a few bankruptcies, so these are out. We also controlled or take out firms that were taken over. And also I can tell more about that later on. We really made a lot of effort to make sure that, for example, our fixing in the or chartering is not driven by some underlying alliances. So we believe that we actually approximated a large amount of fixtures in this chartering market by what we do. So more into the core, what are the variables that we look at? So as I said, is either looking at the particular set of two actors, demand and supply, let's say an operator and a shipper. We assigned a 0 and 1 dependent variable. So we look at whether there was a fixture or there was no fixture in a given year. That means, of course, that in instances where they have been multiple fixtures, we had to collapse them, summarize, and average. So we control for the number of past relations to have this sort of intuition of whether these people have been partners before. That might matter for what happens after the crisis. And then we also split according to the sort of fleet they owned, according to our information, whether these are smaller versus larger players. Our intuition is, again, that these will behave very differently in the crisis. We then also computed measures, as Hans-Joachim said. We knew what type of vessels these people were deploying. So we computed some kind of ratios of geared versus gearless vessels. And our rationale here is that you can deploy your vessel that is geared on many more possible lanes and routes. So this gives you more flexibility. And this is our proxy for this versatility or flexibility. And then we have a bunch of other controls in our models. So we look at the interdependencies between people and actors. So whether they are from the same industry or whether it's, for example, an operator and a shipper. And then we have we have the fixture duration. We have the dead weight of the vessel, so a lot on the fixture and the vessel itself, right? So let me give you a first preview of the results, and I hope you can see what comes in here. So we're going to focus on this 3 lines sort of by the bottom of the table that look into what the crisis did and how it sort of affected the key variables. So we look at crisis and same status, and we see that simply looking at the coefficients on the right-hand side, we see that there are no stars. That means that this per se, so there's no difference between people, operators and shippers being 2 of them, for example, large or too small. This behavior for this pairs of actors didn't really change. Let me get back to that later on. Then we see that the crisis interaction, the second one, and past fixtures, so essentially partnering with somebody who you had been partners before, increased over crisis. This is given by these coefficients 538, 537, 42, 541, and the significance demonstrated by the 3 stars. What does it mean? It means that as compared to the period before crisis, it mattered for you between 2008 and 2011. The sort of past history of what you have been doing mattered more. So you had the tendency to use more the partners that you already know. Finally, the versatility. So essentially the mix of vessels or the sort of more flexible vessels that people have been using also mattered more under crisis. And we extrapolate and say that this might be simply to accommodate some changing needs because the international trade dropped. So maybe, I mean, that was a tough situation for all the shipping companies, and they had to search in some niches or reach out to other than standard partners. So their versatility mattered more in times of crisis than before. So this is the main set of findings. Here, as promised, we did an extra exercise where we looked at, okay, so it didn't matter whether 2 large players or 2 small players, how they were dealing under crisis. There was no difference from before and from under crisis. But now let's see what happens if we split them. So we can do the same exercise looking at how high or large firms dealt with other large firms versus how smaller firms dealt with other smaller things. And here we can see some interesting things. So we actually see that that mattered. So this actual split for large and small firms mattered. Essentially, the large players dealt more with each other. So you immediately think monopolies or like large, shipping companies taking over the chartering market. And that's what we see in this data. Interestingly, going to the column on the right and the crisis and same status, we see that the small players dealt less with each other. What does it mean? How do we interpret this? So we believe that in order to understand what happens here, who are these people dealing? We just said that the large people have been clustering even more, right? In order to understand this, we go to the same role variable, that is fifth from the top, and we can see that essentially that captures whether the shipping people have been chartering to each other or not. And we see that for the large players, this variable is significant and positive, meaning that the shipping people, the operators, have been increasingly dealing with each other, and this were the largest ones. They are taking up the market. While the smaller players, they actually carved out a part of the market for themselves by reaching out to maybe larger, and here it might even be shippers, so like actual cargo owners, although the same role, so like shipping variable is not significant. We believe that this is what happens. And I think with this, and actually the we can also see that it's the same behavior that the large versus small firm display in terms of who they partner with before. So the variable at the bottom, and actually the versatility, it's not really, we believe that the smaller players might be more versatile. It might be that they have a fleet that includes more flexible ships. This variable is positive, so that would in a way be in line with our intuition, but it's not significant. So we think that the flexibility might also lie with their capabilities of maybe reaching out to different markets and different actors. So that's what I had to say. So essentially what we are finding, what we believe is interesting and important for the industry, is that, first of all, larger and smaller firms use different strategies. The larger firms within shipping increasingly fix with each other under crisis. The smaller firms actually reach out to larger ones, and we believe it might be people from outside of the shipping industry, so actually maybe cargo owners. We find that in general flexibility matters. So when you have the right type of flexible ship, you might actually have it a little bit easier during crisis. And that, of course, speaks to the fact that you might be able to capture some parts of the market, although it's tough, maybe on different lanes, in different places with different actors. But that also means that actually this is definitely a tough moment for newcomers in the industry. And I think with this, we are essentially done. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to have a chat.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. Thank you very much, Hans-Joachim, for some interesting findings on how different shipping operators, ship owners, charterers will behave during a time of crisis. I think that it is interesting the fact that the large players will mainly begin to conclude deals with other large ship operators. And that makes me think these large players will often have a history of collaboration through alliances. Could this be something that could also explain that they will kind of turn towards these players in a time of crisis?
So it's an interesting question, and we are thinking along the same lines, especially that there's a lot of research on alliances in this industry. So we actually mapped the alliances in the period that we were interested in. So from 1999 to 2011, there were quite few. But when we tried to look at the fixtures within the chartering market, we literally found no overlap. That means that what happens within alliance stays outside of this chartering market. However, and this is not really speaking to alliances, but we see that the past history, so simply your commitments from the past, they are a sort of shadow of the present, because we see that in all sets of our results, we see that the past fixtures matter for what you are doing now. So you are sort of locked in with your partners in a way, right?
Yeah.
Maybe let me add a little bit. Maybe not from the container shipping market, but for example, from the car carrier market. Ro-ro car carrier market, for example, here you have actually this chartering vice versa. So there are no alliances, in fact, but in fact we have either a group of Nissan related, another one Toyota related, and when they need a vessel, for example, for one trade, they exchange each other. This we cannot actually see here in container shipping. There was actually after the Hanjin demise, there was a time where Merchant Marine, for example, had to give the partners some vessels in order to enter the alliance, but that's actually not done in usual times. That was very unusual happening, actually.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Liping Yang. She writes, thank you for the very interesting presentation. It is quite interesting to see the interaction terms between large players and small players. For example, players with the same, which means players with the same status. What about the interaction between players with different status? So small player interaction, for example.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I have to say we were looking at, these things that we are checking, they were sort of informed by the theory. So we had the theory that, people who are alike, they might be sticking together. In that case, that's not really the case, but let's call it colluding in that way, right? So actually, we didn't include that in the model. That could be an interesting thing to see. But if I read my interactions correctly, so actually this sort of all types of large, small, or small, large, it's actually the same sort of fixtures, they will be included in the baseline. So to me, it would be like a mechanical translation, if I got it right, that these people, so who are maybe, the different types of players, they will essentially interact less. Okay. If it makes sense. I hope I explained it. Yep. It's just the reverse of what we observe here, because these guys should be in the baseline category. So we compared them to the other ones who are the same, right?
Yeah. The big shipping lines actually, so the big liner shipping companies, they have a need of a lot of vessels actually. So they always tend actually to those bigger ones, yeah, the bigger charter non-operating vessel owners, yeah. So anyway, here's also to say that we are looking on a time where actually this Hamburg KG company trust, so this dedicated financing vessel ownership construct really worked. Yeah. 2011, after 2011, what we actually saw is then some sort of a mergers and acquisitions activity among those. Yeah. Yes. So it changed a little bit. Maybe Aga, if you move down one or two slides, I think we can also show this a little bit.
Yes, please. Just tell me where.
So that's for example here a list I just took out of Clarkson. And not to spoil too much the copyrights, I just took the top 10, yeah, for easier look and have a look on this. And we see here 2008 in January, so before the economic crisis, we see a lot of German names actually. and then it changes over time. So January 2012, it didn't change so much. But if you look on, for example, 2020, we see that now a lot of other names coming up there. Yeah. Yeah. And also what we can see is funnily before the crisis and after crisis, if you look of the top 10 fleet, it even boosted. Yeah. During a depressed market, it boosted. Yeah. So yeah.
One more thing. I mean, we used proxies here, so we actually looked, because our idea is that we focused very much on the chartering market, as you noticed. So we tried coding differently this large versus small players, but we believe it should be something in a way endogenous to the market. So we actually coded on how many times you use the chartering market, right? And as we said, maybe had we coded the first top 10 of the industry per se, maybe these results might have been slightly different, as I said, since there's, for example, no overlap with alliances and other activity, right? So, you know, it all depends, and we always have to think through what we are actually saying. So in here, it's really purely about chartering, and I can see that Liping is also asking, would that hold for all shipping sectors? You mean sectors? So you mean like essentially whether this would be the case in dry bulk also, or is that it, or like other markets? I'm not sure.
I would assume that's the question. Yeah,
that's the question. So I mean, I know something about the dry bulk. I studied it. Okay, tramp shipping. Yeah, this I have to say I'm not an expert. I know more about bulk, and I know for sure that these are very, very, very different ones, right? These are, for example, the fixtures that you have there are not in a way transparent like here. So when I worked with, for example, brokers that shared their own data, and I was trying to sort of model and do some predictive models of what is happening and who you deal with, right? So this is a very different segment, and I would tend to think, let's stick to our guns here. I would say this works here, and I would be very careful in extrapolating to anything else that is not similar. And I know that, for example, bulk is not in many different ways. So I would be pretty careful here.
It's even also, if we just move to car carriers, ro-ro shipping, it's also totally different. And especially there, for example, you have also another player in the game, and that's actually, it's the government. It's the government are actually the military forces who need vessels. So if a vessel has about maybe a month, it's not deployed on any trade, they just move some tanks or something else. Yeah. So it's really dedicated. It's also quite significant, is it, that we didn't find any voyage charters in this respect. So maybe if we would have voyage charters, we could say that there are voyage charters. So we see very short charters of maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Maybe they all expressed it in a time charter agreement. Yeah? To say, okay, you get it for a month, and that's one voyage, for example, one round trip or something. Yeah. So we cannot really. No, well, we cannot distinguish, but anyway, there is also no indication that we have, for example, like in tramp ship market, voyage charters.
Yeah. I have to say there is something interesting, maybe speaking to this one, that we find, because we controlled for the duration of contracts, right? Averaged. So we actually found that the smaller players under crisis, they were fixing for longer contracts, which is a little bit interesting, right? So maybe it goes again with these strategies that they simply were in different markets. But this is quite frankly a little bit of a puzzle still for us, but that can be clearly seen here. While the larger players, of course, this is not significant, but they seem to be fixing for shorter, right? So there is very clear indication that at least we looked at interesting variables, because these strategies are very different. So I'm thinking, like for the Trump or for the bulk carrier, I would love to have this data to actually compare what happens there, right? With the use of the same variables.
I have an additional question here, because you look at the financial crisis and the impact. This was an extremely severe crisis. So can you say something about how long and how severe a crisis needs to be if one wants to observe a change in the behavior of these firms with regard to the chartering strategy?
Yeah.
I mean, we saw in the early months of 2020 a short dip in the rates, and then it quickly recovered.
Yeah.
Would that be enough to observe a change in that short notice, do you believe?
So I have to say, like, there's of course things that we could look into in the books, right? So the crisis, yeah, definitely there's something about the severity, right? So about how large the bump can be here. I have no pointer, but yes, and then there's definitely something like you point to the duration. So I can just say empirically, that will be my answer, that I could see that depending on how I computed the crisis variable, it needs to be very precise. It needs to capture the bump, the real drop. I mean, so I literally set it from, I think, March 2008 until I think March 2011. And if I started capturing another semester or trimester when there was an actual recovery trend, then you can see the results are getting blurred and diluted because we are not looking at the crisis. So, I mean, I'm giving a little bit of an empirical answer to that. But yeah, I believe it's an important consideration. So I would think you could probably capture something within a 6-month period of time had the crisis been severe enough. So there's probably some kind of trade-off. The crisis may also be long, but not that severe. And maybe then this is another story, right? So it is almost like a matrix where you could look at the duration and the severity of crisis, where we were in the sort of upper right-hand side having a rather long crisis, and that is also pretty severe. Sorry. Yeah.
Maybe Aka, go a little bit further. I think I have prolonged this from with the Harpex. Yeah, here we have it. That's actually what we see now. Yeah, and yeah, if you look on the very right-hand side, you can see that we are actually upgoing. Yeah, so that's the Wild West booming market at the moment. That's gold rush time, totally gold rush time. So there was a small dip, yeah, at the beginning, yeah, and then now it goes more or less through the rooftop. Yeah, maybe also next slide, Aga. Here you can see, for example, also the idle fleet. Yeah, so the idle fleet is always an indicator how much vessels are really needed on the market. And then we see on the left-hand side, we see the economic crisis, which was really long and depressing. Yeah, and then there was this in spring, it went up in 2011. Whereas on the other side, we see here starting somehow in mid of 19, getting a little bit up, maybe because there are also a lot of scrubber retrofit here in. So the market actually was, I would not say depressed, but actually it was a little bit like, okay, we have to meet these IMO needs. Yeah, so they took out actually a lot of vessels out of the trades in order to make it retrofit it. Then we had this peak, this heavy peak, and it was only maybe a couple of weeks, actually, maybe 3 months. And then we get the craziness of the market. Maybe the next slide, Aga, we see the craziness of the market.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's like, I just was really astonished about it. I just compiled two slides together, or 2 graphs together, and you can see this here. So what you see, the line above that's the global on-time performance as an indicator. So from Intel, from Copenhagen, you see it gets very crappy. So there was the low point now from last quarter. I think that was, it's not yet, but it's Q1. I think 34% overall, all markets, ships, vessels, liner vessels are on time. So as expected, yeah. So this also a little bit includes, of course, the Suez Canal blockade, for example, for a week, but it's not only this, it was before already. And then you see on the other side, down below the graph, that's the Shanghai Europe SCFI index, that's the spot market index, yeah. for a TU. And this goes almost through the rooftop. So what we have at the moment, it's not a depressed market. Yeah, it's just the contrary. Yeah. And also a reminder, maybe on the right-hand side, I'm pretty good in trade press articles, pretty good equipped. And I found here two of them I just depicted here. So container lines, no one ever heard about at Europe or never thought about, are now, for example, on the Far East Europe trade lane. So the above, for example, the vessel above is 1,000, I think now 1,092 TU. This actually I could also see on the river Danube here. Yeah, and this is now deployed on Far East Europe trade lane. Yeah, the lower, it's not too much bigger. It's also deployed on this. Yeah, between Nanjing and Liverpool. Yeah. So these vessels, maybe also to give an idea about, these vessels are 1/10 or 1/20, yeah, smaller, or it's just the size. So you take 20 vessels, and then you're actually 20 vessels of those, and then you have the Ever Given. Yeah, it's totally crazy. The market at the moment is totally crazy, but we are looking forward to see also nice patterns. Yeah. Patterns we have also seen after 9/11 was, for example, that the chartering got shorter and shorter and shorter. So chartering periods got shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah, that's also a little bit of having some uncertainty about the market. And also what we have seen, it's especially here in the crisis, some container shipping lines just didn't rely on chartering, but they just acquired the vessels. Yeah. At the moment, if you ask the people from the liner shipping companies, they say, okay, if you can sell me a vessel, if you have some vessel in the backyard, which is able to transport containers, please, we will charter it for any price. Yeah. So actually the market is totally clean. Yeah. Yeah. Really aseptic clean. There's nothing. There's nothing on the market. And this we didn't have in any time before. Yeah. So we are looking forward actually really to have a next look on this, going further with the data and have a look on this crisis anyway. Yeah?
Can I also add something? I don't know if we still have 1 minute. Maybe I can share something that we are very proud of. So we have another study and then another planned study. So that we are actually out with. It's almost ready. It is a study where we sort of unpack a little bit different relations. So we are looking into how the matching between a buyer and supplier works in that respect. And we include some really exciting variables that we can clearly see they work. So we interviewed people, we heard about how people make decisions in this market, and we decided to include indicators, essentially signals of supplier reliability. So we look into how much a ship operator has been changing partners before a given time, and this is a signal of his or her reliability. And we compare this with their sort of existing relationship from the past, and we have find very exciting results. And that's a paper that we have sent now to the largest management conference, Academy of Management, and we are one of the 3 finalists of the Best Paper Award. So we are very, very proud. And yeah, we hope we can get back with a prize.
Yeah, maybe we will hear more about your findings from that paper in a future tidbit here. We are a little bit over time now, so I think it's time to round off this session. Thank you very much, Agnieszka. Thank you very much, Hans-Joachim, for an interesting presentation. Thank you very much to the audience for joining us, for some good questions. If you are interested in more webinars on the latest maritime research, I can strongly recommend that you follow Marlock and the Maritime Research Alliance on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and I hope to see you again in the near future. Bye-bye.